This is the AWS Morning Brief Security Edition. AWS is fond of saying security is job zero. That means it's nobody in particular's job, which means it falls to the rest of us. Just the news you need to know, none of the fluff.
Welcome to Last Week in AWS Security. Let's get right into it. First, there was a write-up of someone's experience going through the publicly available Flaws version 1 and version 2 labs, which are created and hosted by Scott Piper. Highly recommend them. Now, Microsoft had one heck of a breach that I'm sure we're going to be hearing about for weeks now. They gloss over how a Microsoft signing key was leaked in the first place or exactly what its scope is, but I want to call attention to how the signs of the breach in your Azure account are tied to an enhanced level of license. This isn't to bag on Microsoft, but rather to yell at AWS for a moment, because the same principle is true for CloudTrail audit logs. If you want data events, the sort of thing you're going to need for many forms of breach detection and incident response, you can expect to pay handsomely for it. And I don't like this at all. It means that the default inexpensive version is the crappy, less secure version of cloud, and the actually secure one costs a lot more. I get that everyone has to make money, but this is not the way. When you read that an Amazon security engineer was indicted in a $9 million digital currency heist, as happened last week, it's only natural to wonder if it involved AWS credits somehow. It did not. And a far-right publisher earned this week's S3 Bucket Negligence Award, which is kind of great, because who doesn't secretly love to see bad things happen to terrible people? From AWS, Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP supports write once, read many, or worm protection with SnapLock. If you're responsible for compliance and its associated data retention, you just sat up and started paying serious attention to this one. And IAM policies and bucket policies and ACLs, oh my, controlling access to S3 resources is years old, but it was updated last week, thankfully, to reflect the current state of the world with regard to S3 best practices. If only the sea of community blog posts would likewise update themselves. There are a bunch of guides on the internet today that can only be described as actively harmful just because so much has evolved. Ensure that your best practices are kept up to date as well. And a tool is launched, IAM Data, specifically AWS IAM Data. And it's a guide to AWS IAM resources that you'd hope that AWS had put out, but aren't surprised in the least that they didn't. It's easy to navigate, it shows the relationships you want, and I endorse this. And that's what happened last week in AWS Security. Onward.
Thank you for listening to the AWS Morning Brief Security Edition. For the latest in AWS security that actually matters, please follow AWS Morning Brief on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever the hell it is you find the dulcet tones of my voice, and be sure to sign up for the Last Week in AWS newsletter at lastweekinaws.com.